Hello everyone, hi, I'm Matt Hubsch, I'm a legend agronomist, and I guess I had a few things I'd like to visit with you about today. I've had numerous calls coming from across our geography, which for legend seeds, a lot of that has to do as far as geography-wise, the upper Midwest. But I've had a lot of calls coming in about moths. These moths are flying everywhere. What are they? They're cutworm moths, obviously, and everybody's made the assumption that they're all black cutworm. Well, that may be the case, but it may not be the case because we do see a lot of different cutworm moths flying. So for you that are out here and you're seeing these moths flying around, I will have a few things as far as identification of the moth, but the moth's not the big concern. It's the actual worm itself, the larvae itself. So, a moth's an indication that they're in the area, but the actual larvae is the one that basically we are really concerned because they're the ones that cause the crop loss. I've got three that are probably the primary as we get into the northern corn belt, central corn belt. Three of the primary cutworms that we see in our area, one being variegated cutworm, one being dingy cutworm, and one being black. Now, variegated cutworm, a lot of times it's not a problem in row crop, but it can be if you're coming into a scenario such as an alfalfa field that's been broken, a sod field that's been broken, because these guys are attracted to those green crops in the fall. They come in, they fly in, they see these alfalfa fields, they lay eggs. Next thing you know, basically next spring, there's abundance of variegated cutworm. So if you're going in that situation and you're going to be planting corn, be on the lookout for these guys. As far as some real quick tips as far as identification of variegated, very simple. Got a yellow dash on each body segment right here. That's a body segment, but a yellow dash. That's indication it's variegated. But don't be basically concentrating so much on variegated because it is more of a pest of those types of rotation. These are the two that in corn we're really concerned of. Good thing about dingy is dingy, a lot of times things happen early. They'll overwinter here in our region as an immature larvae. Things happen pretty soon. By the time basically we get our corn planted and our corn is actually up and it's vulnerable, these guys that pupate turn into a moth, not a problem anymore. The blacks, why are they such a concern? They do not overwinter here. They overwinter in the southern region of the United States. So they've got to blow up with the winds that are blowing north. They've got to make their way to our area. So by the time they get here as a moth, they lay eggs, especially late planted corn. This is the big concern. They lay eggs, they turn into a larvae. You've got this late planted corn that's really small. These guys basically can really take out a stand quite fast. Now, one thing about corn, as corn matures and gets bigger, about V6 stage, a lot of times you get that larger plant. It's pretty hard for any kind of a cutworm basic species to actually cause a lot of physical damage as far as cutting. But when it comes to these small little plants, that's when we've got to be a big concern. So, the cutting of the plant is obviously the big loss here. Now, does this mean that this plant, you see this plant right here that's been cut, does that mean that that plant is actually physically dead? Probably not. The big thing about cutworms that I like to bring up is that they kind of follow that soil moisture. So if you've got ample moisture and they're near the surface and they're cutting off, let's say a V2, V3 corn plant, the growing point's still below the ground. It's not till V6 once again, till actually that growing point's above ground. So at this stage, basically, they're cutting at the surface, it'll probably regrow. But as that soil dries, as basically we get a little hotter, drier weather, they're going to burrow down in that soil, cut it below the soil line, now you got problems. Sometimes you might be out here and you see this, where you got basically a bunch of holes. Looks like someone took a screwdriver and screwed through that plant. Well, in that case, basically, we had probably a little bitty cutworm larvae out there, because there are 7 different instars, 7 different growth stages to larvae. So when it was very small, it probably cut it once again at the soil surface, it outgrew it. So when should I spray? Well, there are traits out there that have cutworm on its label. When I mean cutworm, I mean black cutworm. The Agronomist Viptera has black cutworm on its label. Anything also Herculex traded will have black cutworm on its label. Does that mean that it's basically you're never ever going to see feeding? No, you may see some white feeding, because with these certain traits, the actual larvae itself, the cutworm larvae itself, have to feed so much, basically, or get so much of that plant material into its system before it'll actually kill that larvae. So, if you do not have those traits, let's just say you've got a VT Double Pro, a VT Triple Pro, an AgroSure 3000, something like that, or conventional corn, now you need to be concerned, especially if you're seeing cut plants. When would I spray? Simplest way I do it, down and dirty, is I count out 100 plants, and I look at basically which ones have been cut. If 5 to 10% of those plants have been cut, and I can actually physically dig around the base of the plant, because they're usually going to be at the base of those cut plants. Physically dig around the base of that plant and find cutworm that are there, and I got 5 to 10% of my plants being cut, I'm going to be out there spraying with an insecticide. Fortunately, a lot of your insecticides are very, very good on these, basically, whether it's a black cutworm, variegated cutworm, they're all very good. They're not too hard to kill with insecticides. So, in that case, 5 to 10%, I don't have any of those traits I was talking about that have control, I'd be out there. Real quick on the moths, because that's what you're seeing, guys, right now. You're seeing these moths flying around, and there's a fair amount of them out there, so be on the lookout. The variegated, real quick identification, there's going to be a tan oval on its wing. Very evident tan oval. Kind of a little kidney-shaped deal in the center. That's the variegated. The black cutworm, you're going to have this simple dagger on each side. It looks like a dagger. That is basically the key pattern as far as identification of the black cutworm. Dingies now, Dingies basically growing up on a farm as a kid. You'd see these moths hitting the screen door, and they'd have this pretty color to their wing pattern, I always thought. Well, that's your dingies. Once again, these guys are out awfully early. A lot of times, basically, they're in a big larvae stage before we even got our corn planted. So, sometimes never really been a problem, or a lot of times in our region, northern corn belt, never been a lot of a problem. Can be once in a while. Variegated, once again, going into alfalfa ground, going into sod breaking, that's where you're going to find the problems with the variegated. Not so much in the corn bean rotation. Blacks are a big culprit, especially on later planted corn, because once again, they've got to migrate here, and they got to go through that stages. With that being said, that's all I've got. I'd like to thank you for your time.